Tonight, our topic is the 10 Imperfections of Insight, part 1, and then tomorrow night will be part 2. Now, what happens is in the meditation practice that when meditators practice diligently, as all of you are doing, and this not just for a few hours, but for hour after hour, day after day, then changes occur. And what we've done so far over the last few Dhamma talks, we've tried to cover what's happening in the meditation practice for the meditators. And I've tried hard not to go ahead too much, but not to lag behind too much, so to get it just right for the majority of the meditators. Now, the Pali term for these 10 imperfections, sometimes also referred to as the 10 corruptions of insight, is Dasa Vipassana Upakilesa. Dasa stands for 10, and Vipassana, you know already, is insight, and Upakilesa are your defilements, or are your corruptions, or imperfections, impurities, anything that spoils or obstructs. And these occur, or these 10 imperfections of insight, as the name already indicates, are somewhat unique as a whole to the practice of Vipassana. Now, when a meditator has clearly comprehended the three universal characteristics of anicca, dukkha, and anatta, so impermanence and then suffering or unsatisfactoriness and non-self, and then continues with the meditation, and then very soon will the meditator realize that things have changed, and the mind overall becomes calmer, cleaner, or clearer, and more serene. And it seems that the unwholesome mental states that previously had given a meditator so much trouble, these have subsided. And once these mental defilements, and in particular the hindrances, have lost their momentum, then wholesome mental states have the chance to arise in the stream of consciousness. Now, among these 10 imperfections of insight, 9 are inherently wholesome mental states, whereas the last one is inherently an unwholesome one. And we'll go more into this later on. Now, there are, for these 10 imperfections, there are 2 major sources where they are described. One is the path of purification, the so-called Visuddhimagga, in its 20th chapter, paragraph 105 and following paragraphs. And then these 10 imperfections are also mentioned in the Abhidhamma Sangaha, namely the compendium or manual of the Abhidhamma, so key work and introductory work. And in the case of the way these imperfections are mentioned, the serial order in the Visuddhimagga is different from the serial order as given in the Abhidhamma Sangaha. And the order which makes more sense from a practical point of view is the order from the Visuddhimagga, which and it's this order that we're going to follow. Now, these 10 imperfections of insight occur, as mentioned, when a meditator has, brought the third, the insight knowledge, the knowledge of comprehension or by comprehension, to maturity, and they occur, during the fourth insight knowledge. Now, the fourth insight knowledge gets further subdivided into two parts, namely its tender phase and the mature phase. And these 10 imperfections occur during the tender phase of the fourth insight knowledge. And then during the mature phase, the situation or the picture changes somewhat or significantly. Now, those 10 imperfections and the vast majority of you has experienced at least some of them, the first ones, maybe not all, but at least some, are as follows. Namely, illumination given in the Pali scripture language as obasa, and then the second one is knowledge given in the Pali scripture language as jnana. Then we have joy or rapture as number 3, piti in the Pali scripture language, and then as number 4 we have tranquility, which is referred to in Pali as passaddhi, and then as number 5 comes happiness, which is given as sukha in the Pali scriptural language. And then the next one is given in English as determined faith, and in Pali the term for this is adimokha. And then number 7 is energy, pagaha in Pali, and then the 8th one is given as establishment, and the Pali term for this is upatana, and this refers simply to mindfulness itself, and actually strong mindfulness. And then as number 9 comes equanimity, given in Pali as upekkha, and the last one, which is the unwholesome one, is attachment, nikanti in Pali. Now, what happens is that when these imperfections start occurring, then at least for some meditators, and I'm saying some, not all, they may begin with the experience of illumination. Various forms of illumination coming in the form of seeing various kinds of lights, and sometimes it feels as if another person is holding a flashlight or directing or shining a flashlight right into our face, and at other times this experience comes in the form of seeing a multitude of lights like fireworks, or some brilliant lights, or sometimes it seems as if light is emanating from the body. And now this particular experience of illumination can be quite outstanding. And so what may happen is that even if one is in a place like this with no electricity and no incandescent or fluorescent lights, one sits in meditation, and then one might find that light arises within the body, and then it emanates from the body, maybe covering the area of one's seat. And now, depending on the strength of one's concentration, this experience of illumination can get much stronger. Now, to give you an illustration for this, an illustration that stems from the Visuddhimagga, and apparently in the old days, so this many centuries ago, there were a monastery existed in a place called Chitala Pabata. So that's the so-called Chitala mountain. And it so happened during a dark night, it was the dark side of the moon, so not full moon, new moon, and so two monastics were sharing a building, and both of them were practicing, just like you, Satipatthana intensively. And the building was separated into two parts, and two rooms, and so then in the middle of the night, these two monastics they were practicing, and then they got together for a chat. And the first one says to the second monastic, just imagine what I just experienced. Namely, a tremendous amount of light started arising in the body, and this light then started emanating from the body, and it emanated all the way up to the shrine area, where there is a table there, and then where devotees had placed flowers in 5 different colors. So his light was emanating, was lighting up that shrine area. And to this, the second monastic says, "You think this is wonderful? This is nothing. And I just practiced, and just like you, intensively, and then a strong light arose within the body, and it was so strong that it even lit up the ocean nearby, so that I could see the fish and the turtle swimming around at a distance of 1 or 2 leagues." And so this then gives you an idea that there's a variety to this experience, and some experience, some actually don't really experience this illumination, and some to experience it to some extent, and some to a great extent. Now, sometimes meditators who don't experience this illumination think or end up thinking that there's something wrong with their practice. Maybe during group interview or so, they hear some other meditators reporting illumination experiences, and they themselves are trying so hard, and there's just no illumination to be gained, and so they think there's something wrong with their practice. But to assure you, this is not a problem whatsoever. In some meditators it just happens, in others it doesn't, and if it doesn't happen, the practice will still unfold further. And so it says in the Visuddhimagga that some were able to have this effect of illumination go for several leagues, so which is many miles, and in the case of the Buddha, even for several great distances up to the Brahma world, if I'm not mistaken. Now, when a meditator has a pronounced experience of illumination, as described, then three potential dangers loom. And what are those dangers? Who knows? Attachment, yes. And so instead of attachment, you can say even more precisely.
Conceit.
Conceit is the second one, yes, and? Stagnation, that will be the result of these dangers. Well, the last one is wrong view, and the first one is craving. And of course attachment is a form of craving. Now, the way this happens is that the experience is so outstanding, or maybe so outstanding, that a meditator then thinks, wow, this is really far out, and let me see if I can repeat the experience the next sitting, and maybe I can enjoy it, and forget about all these instructions, meditation instructions of being mindful and of observing whatever predominant object arises in a non-attached manner and non-reactive manner. After so much suffering, physical and mental suffering, experienced just a while ago, I really have deserved a break. I've really deserved some wonderful experiences, and here comes one. Let me grasp it and hold on to it as much as possible. And so this would be one danger. And the second danger lies in, well, one has an experience of illumination, and it's quite outstanding, and maybe it's so strong that here in this very meditation hall, all of a sudden it lights up the place, and so the fellow meditators are all surprised. Where does this light come from? And maybe then Vayasita's Mountain Refuge will decide to keep you here for future illumination. That would save them a lot of money for lamp oil. Or maybe Beth will hire you for the kitchen, and then she doesn't need to use the gas lamps anymore. So, anyways, since you are performing a spectacular feat here with the illumination, and you might realize, well, the others don't seem to be able to do the same thing, so maybe I'm the only one who is capable of this, so I must be a really outstanding meditator. And this then naturally leads to the arising of pride and conceit. And so this is then a real danger for the practice. Or Or what might happen too is that based on the same experience, a meditator then thinks, well, the Buddha always spoke about enlightenment, and so now I have this wonderful illumination. This must be it. So what had to be attained has been attained. There is no future rebirth for me. And so thinking like this, a person might decide, okay, why strive any further? The goal has been attained in the form of true knowledge and liberation. Why stick around here any longer? I might as well go back. And this would be a major mistake. And the mistake in all three cases lies that if one develops a craving for illumination, or develops some pride and conceit based on it, or develops some wrong view, mistaking the experience to be a nibbanic experience, then it will lead to a stagnation in one's meditation practice. And what happens is, since it is such a unique and outstanding experience, the mind gets fascinated with it, and it reverts back to it over and over and over again, and it can't get enough experiencing it. And so when it happens like this, then one's practice is no longer moving ahead. And that's actually a pity, because many better experiences remain to come. Now, these three potential dangers apply to all of the other remaining imperfections. And when saying three potential dangers, it does not mean that a meditator will experience all three of them in each or for each of the imperfections. Some are wise enough, and some are already or have developed into professional meditators, so they can't be swayed by these imperfections anymore. And they say, yeah, well, interesting, but let's move on. Now, the second imperfection is that of knowledge, and this in the Pali language is given as jnana, and the Visuddhimagga explains this as knowledge owing to insight. So this then makes it very clear that this is a knowledge that arises in the context of insight meditation, and not some other type of meditation. And the way it's being described is as an unerring, keen, incisive, and sharp knowledge, and as sharp as a lightning flash. Now, the way this occurs in one's meditation practice is that the mind, or as soon as the mindfulness has landed on an object, right away knowledge about the nature of the object is there, and without having to spend much time on the object of observation. And it is in this context also that a meditator may have the impression as if he or she is gaining some discriminative knowledge, having heard of this term vaguely, not exactly knowing what it means, and then mistaking it. And so also in this context, one may then gain a deeper understanding into some theoretical points from the suttas or from the Abhidhamma, things that one has heard or has read about and previously one didn't understand. Now they start making sense. And so when it happens like this, then it's quite likely that a meditator again may fall into the trap of those three potential dangers. Now, when the knowledge is keen and unerring and incisive and sharp, then naturally one may think, well, it's one will compare this to what one's knowledge was like earlier on, frequently quite dull, and so one takes a liking to it, and then develops a craving for this sharp knowledge. Or based on one's very penetrative and deep insights into the nature of mind and matter, one might be misled to think that one knows more now than one's fellow meditators or even one's teacher, and that one then is already qualified for teaching. And based on this, then pride and conceit may arise. And in the last case, one might mistake this keen and unerring and incisive and sharp knowledge to be related to the supramundane path and knowledge, and the path knowledge and the fruition knowledge, and then again this will mislead or this will lead in all three cases to stagnation of one's meditation practice. Now, from an experiential point of view, hearing the reports of meditators during interviews over a number of years now, this particular aspect, the meditate about very sharp knowledge, meditators frequently don't report that much. Now, probably it's there, but it goes somewhat unnoticed. Now, what is, or the imperfection that is really outstanding and that meditators frequently do report is that of joy and rapture. So the third one. And this joy and rapture, again, is owing to insight, and here this is important. Joy and rapture may also arise in the context of samatha meditation. So when we develop the absorptions, the jhanas, and as part of the first jhana, joy and rapture figures as the third jhanic factor if we base it on the fivefold way of reckoning. And so then the question may arise: joy that arises in the meditation practice, or this type of joy, is it owing to jhana practice or is it owing to insight practice? And here the Visuddhimagga clearly states what we mean is joy or rapture owing to insight meditation. And this joint rapture finds, or the cause for its arising lies in the fact that a meditator has not too long ago overcome all the major physical pains and aches, and on top of this also the 5 hindrances which early on gave so much trouble. And so, in the absence of those hindrances and pains and aches, naturally gladness arises in the mind, and this is said to be a weak form of joint rapture, and it may then turn into the stronger joy and rapture, balawa piti in the Pali scriptural language. Now, joint rapture can be experienced in different ways. It's not just that we experience it as rapture, but we may also experience it as interest, taking taking renewed interest in the meditation practice, and being enthusiastic about our meditation. Even for some meditators, getting excited about what is happening, or it may also manifest in the form of elation. So joy, rapture, zest, interest, enthusiasm, excitement, elation are some of the ways how this piti may manifest. And from this, or in this connection, there's something we can learn, namely, when it may happen in our meditation practice that we are overcome by boredom with the predominant phenomena. So having to observe the same objects over and over and over again may lead to boredom. Now, if this is the case, what to do in order to overcome the boredom? One way, one approach would be to arouse certain joy and rapture. So maybe to look at the objects in a different way, or from a different aspect or angle, and then to investigate this object, and then when one finds something new, interest is there, and the interest will then dispel the boredom. So the antithesis, or the antidote to boredom, or one of the antidotes to boredom, could be given as joint rapture in the form of taking interest. Now, since joint rapture is part of our meditation practice, or becomes part of our meditation practice, we might as well get familiar with its definition, so that we then recognize it more easily should it arise again in the future. And piti is said to have the characteristic of endearing, which means it makes you somewhat lovable or endearing. Others will like you, and so, or will hold you in esteem. The Pali for this is sampiyayana. And the function of joint rapture, when it arises in the mind, is to refresh the mind and body. This is one function. And the second function is to pervade, namely to pervade the body with a thrill of rapture. And the classical fourfold definition for piti says that its manifestation lies in elation. And in other words, when we feel elated, then there is usually some bubbly energy to it. So the Venerable Sadhu Pandita of Burma, frequently when he talks about piti, he mentions this particular aspect. There's some bubbly energy to this mental state. And in a while we'll see that it's different from another mental state that people easily confuse, namely sukha or happiness, which is much calmer. And the body and the mind are said to be the proximate cause for the arising of this joy and rapture. Now, when joy and rapture, piti, arises in our meditation practice as part of the imperfections, then it may manifest in different ways. And the texts speak of 5 kinds of joy and rapture, namely minor joy, kudaka piti in the Pali scripture language, and then momentary joy, kanika piti in Pali, then showering joy, okantika piti in Pali, and then we have the so-called uplifting joy, ubeka piti in Pali, and the last one is the pervading joy, which in the Pali scripture language is given as varana piti. Now, you may not necessarily know what is meant by these 5. Now, the most simple type and the weakest type comes in the form of minor joy and rapture. And minor joy and rapture, kudaka piti, frequently is experienced as chills and thrills in the body. So, chills and thrills running through the body, and meditators also frequently report goose flesh. You say goose flesh or goosebumps? Either one. So, those 3 things. And to this one can still somewhat relate. However, when it comes to the second kind of joy and rapture, namely the momentary joy, it comes in a form that most people don't necessarily consider as a form of joy or rapture. Namely, and the term is indicative, momentary joy. So, sudden flashes of electric current that are rushing through the body, and that may cause a meditator or may cause a sudden jolt of the body. And so a current of electricity, so it seems, running through the body, like sometimes as if one were hit by a flash of or struck by lightning, and mostly that. And so then frequently meditators say, what does this have to do with joy and rapture? This is not all that pleasant. And indeed, it's kind of, first of all, it's usually it comes as a surprise. There's no announcement there. And then oftentimes these experiences can be actually quite strong. And then afterwards no one is happy to have survived. Now, the third kind of joy and rapture is easier to handle, and it's milder. And this is the so-called showering joy, okanti kapiti in the Pali scriptural language. Now, the illustration that the Visuddhimagga gives for this is, it's as if one were to sit at the beach somewhere, and then some bigger wave is coming in and then breaking across the body, and the water is showering all over the body. So this kind of illustration, or this illustration, gives you an idea of what is meant by the experience. Now, quite overwhelming at times can be the experience of the so-called uplifting joy and rapture, ubeka piti in the Pali scriptural language. Now, this, when it's at its best, and it's considered a form of stronger joint rapture, may cause a meditator to literally get tossed off his or her meditation cushion. And so if this happens to you in the midst of a sitting, and you're part of a group sitting, and everyone else is so quiet, and all of a sudden there's a big bang, and so you are ending up on the floor, and you don't quite know how you got there, then this is really something else. And once what happened in Lumbini, during one of our winter retreats there, longer winter retreat, we had a group of a strong group of meditators, with a number of them quite advanced. And so the good ones were sitting in the front row, with the Buddha statue in the front, and then, so 4 or 5 of them in one row, semicircle. And then, within one and the same sitting, one meditator jolts up to one side, and then all of a sudden, another meditator jolts to the other side. Then, not too long after this, a third one gets literally, like I said, tossed off the cushion, ends up on the floor, and then maybe, and one experienced this uplifting joy in a literal sense of the whole body being moved upward, pushed upward, catapulted upward, and falling back onto the cushion. So you can imagine, with 3 or 4 events like this, all the other meditators were giggling and laughing. And they were surely, especially the newer ones, they were surely wondering, my goodness, what is happening in this meditation practice? Is this really safe? Is this safe for consummation? And what if I continued, will I end up just like these meditators in the front row? And so this was really something. And I remember having heard another story, but apparently it really happened at the Mahasi Meditation Center in Burma. So it's the main center where the Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw taught for many decades. And it seemed in the 1980s that at one point there was a Thai monastic, a Thai monk, practicing there, and I didn't meet or I never had a chance to meet this person. Just heard about him. Anyways, he was practicing not in the meditation hall, but rather in his room. So we had where the foreigners' quarters there, one for the men, one for the women. So he was practicing in his room, and the rooms there all had mosquito screens, and so apparently he was experiencing these imperfections of insight. And quite on a regular basis, he would experience this uplifting joy every day in the afternoon at a certain time. And so then he himself was quite surprised, and then he invited the other foreigners who were, staying at the foreigners' lodge. Well, if you want to see something unusual, please feel free to stand in front of the window at 4 p.m. this afternoon. So I suppose everyone lined up, and at the appointed, this Thai monk was sitting there on his bed, and you can imagine the bed is somewhat off the ground, and the beds there aren't actually quite high, and so at the appointment, so he was sitting there, the others were peeping into the room, and then all of a sudden a huge force throws him off his cushion, and he lands on the floor. So these kind of things happen. Although apparently, so far, no one really ended up with any major injury, like broken bones and the like. Now here we all have these wonderful cushions. So I guess if Ubeka Piti happens to one of us, then it should be all right. Now, so apart from this Ubeka Piti, there is the last one given as pervading joy, Varana Piti, and this is described as an extremely subtle sensation, very subtle, refined sensation, blissful sensation that goes through the entire body. And certainly, so this can be quite, or one can easily get attached to it. Now, with regard to these, to joy and rapture in its 5 different forms, one may easily develop, one may get attached, and one may also develop a craving for it, or like maybe the Thai monk gets proud and conceited, and or one may mistake the experience to be a supramundane experience. Now, in all 3 cases, if one falls prey to these dangers, then it would lead to a stagnation in one's meditation practice. Now, with regard to joy and the next imperfection of insight, which is tranquility, meditators easily get attached to it. And the problem lies in these experiences are so so wonderful and so different from the ordinary, and that a meditator really then indulges in these experiences and wants to go on experiencing it for longer and longer stretches of time. And one person has expressed this in the following words, namely celebrating this joy and tranquility. So getting getting totally attached to it. Now, the 4th imperfection of insight is that of tranquility, passaddhi. And this passaddhi is a mental state that is quite prevalent in the meditation practice, and it's a very useful mental state. And instead of saying calmness, we can also say stillness, or we could refer to it as serenity, or as tranquility, or as peace, or peacefulness, or coolness of mind. And since this is a mental state that we might experience, or that we surely will experience many more times, we might as well become familiar with it, not just from a theoretical point of view, but also from a practical point of view. Now, this tranquility is defined by the Visuddhimagga as having the characteristic of quieting down the disturbances of the mind. So, let's say, as an example, first, the mind is agitated through either restlessness or remorse or worry, and so the mind is going here and there, and so it's everything but calm, and then gradually the tranquility comes in. And as tranquility as a mental factor comes in, then it will lead to this calming down or quieting down of the disturbances. And this literally means that the movements in the mind start to decrease more and more until there is a real stillness of the mind. And it's sometimes like the surface of some mountain lake, some alpine lake with no breeze. So the surface of an alpine lake will be very still and even. The function of this certain tranquility or calmness is given as to crush such disturbances, and it is said to manifest as peacefulness, or as peacefulness and coolness. And the proximate cause for the arising of tranquility is given as the body, and as the mental body and consciousness. And this tranquility is said to be, rightly so, the opposite to restlessness and worry or remorse, and both of these mental factors bring about agitation of the mind. Now, this tranquility, just like the joy and rapture, is or arises owing to the insight meditation. And so, along with it go a number of other mental states, such as lightness, in the Pali language given as lahuta, and then furthermore as pliancy, mudita, or the malleability of the mind, and then wieldiness of the mind, kamanyata, and then sharpness of the mind, pagunyata, and rectitude of the mind, ujjhagata, in the Pali scriptural language. And for the time being, let me pick just one or two out of those, and I'll explain the others probably tomorrow. Now, lightness is to be taken literally. It is lightness of the mind, and it also is or manifests then as lightness in the body, and so it can manifest as lightness during this lightness of the body during sitting meditation as well as walking meditation. Now, when calmness arises in the practice of a meditator, and this meditator reports it, it's almost like a dead sure. The question when I ask, did you experience some lightness or not? Almost in all cases will the meditator respond that yes, indeed, lightness was there. So there's a strong connection between those two mental states. And so this lightness in the sitting meditation may be experienced as sometimes as lightness of the upper part of the body, and sometimes people say the lower part is certainly somewhat heavy. Or in the walking meditation, meditators who experience it strongly may say they feel like floating in the air, or like walking on a cloud. So it's something that is a particular experience that is different from the ordinary. Now, as for ujjhagata, the last one, rectitude, when this mental state arises, and then it brings about a change in behavior, in mental behavior of the person. So, even if a meditator previously was somewhat dishonest and prone to deceit and certain fraudulence, then and pretense. Deceit and pretense, then these negative qualities will be substituted by rectitude or uprightness of the mind. So this satya comes in the following form, namely, let's say one doesn't have certain wholesome qualities, however one pretends to have those wholesome qualities. So that's one thing, that's pretense. And so the other one is certain kind of deceiving, having some fault, or having committed some offense or so, one covers it up and certainly then creates the impression as if nothing has happened. So ujjhagata, rectitude of the mind, cuts through both of these negative mental patterns. Now, let's see. When we undergo intensive meditation practice, we do undergo changes. It's not that we start on day one and then after maybe 20 days of intensive practice or 1 month of intensive practice, we are exactly the same person as we were in the beginning. Not so. But rather, as Kate Wheeler, the writer and editor, has certainly described it at the end of one of Sadhu Pandita's retreats at the forest refuge in Berry. As a meditator, we're more something like being stuck into or put into a laundry machine, and then laundry powder being added, detergent being added, and then then the machine being switched on, cold water flowing into the laundry machine. Then the laundry machine starts operating, spinning, or revolving, and then we end up all dizzy, and and tumbling in there, and all of the impurities and stains that we've brought along, gradually, they get removed, and then as we're in the laundry machine, first cold, and then we're being subjected to the hot water treatment, and once we've survived that, then eventually there'll be the water gets pumped off, and then there'll be the spinning and the drying, and finally, when the program has run its course, then we come all clean out of the laundry machine. So the same thing happens this is actually what happens in the practice, figuratively speaking. When you go for a retreat, don't think this is going to be some mild program, but rather some effective program. And since the attainment of path and fruition knowledge, so supramental path and fruition knowledge, requires, or since that experience itself is an experience of purity, it requires that we prepare the ground for this. And this is best done by observing precepts, and by changing our verbal and bodily ways of doing things, and then also by changing our mental ways. And if we find that over the years we've accumulated some bad mental habits or patterns, then we should recognize these and let go of them as quickly as we can, and replace them by wholesome patterns. So the meditation practice can be described as a process of several stages or places where the unwholesome gets replaced by the wholesome. And when Ujjhagata arises here as part of the Imperfections of Insight, then this will be one such case. Now, the next and last imperfection for tonight is going to be that of happiness. Or maybe, before we go on to happiness, in the case of tranquility, just like with the other imperfections mentioned earlier on, three potential dangers loom. And so if we are an uninformed meditator, then we may crave for the tranquility more and more, and we may end up getting proud and conceited because of the experience, or we may mistake the stillness of the mind to be an experience of Nibbana, when of course it's not the case yet. So if one falls prey to one of these, one or two or all of these dangers, then naturally one's practice is going to stagnate, and the stagnation of the practice is actually just the minimum consequence. The maximum consequence is what?
Reverse.
Yes. A reverse or a nosedive, pretty sudden nosedive in one's practice. So the practice collapses to some extent, and to a meditator's consternation, one finds oneself experiencing again what? who can answer this by experience? You're saying 5. The 5 hindrances. So if one hasn't had enough of the 5 experiences yet, then the best way to re-experience them is just get attached and crave for the tranquility and get proud and conceited because of it, or mistake it for nibbana. And the Dhamma will do its work, and you'll soon be welcoming the hindrances again. So the next imperfection, number 5, is that of happiness, sukha, in the Pali scriptural language. And as usual, the Visuddhimagga points out this happiness is a happiness that arises owing to insight meditation. And again here, this qualification is necessary to discern it or to distinguish it from happiness that might also arise in the context of the samatha meditation. So when you practice for the jhanas or absorptions, then one of the jhanic factors is sukha or happiness. And so what we mean here is not the sukha from the samatha meditation, but the sukha from the insight meditation. And this happiness is said to be an exceedingly refined type of happiness that floods the entire body of a meditator. Now, again, in our attempt to become familiar with sukha, when it arises in our practice, both from a practical as well as a theoretical point of view, let us look at its classical definition. And so the characteristic of sukha, happiness, is given as experiencing a desirable, tangible object, and its function is to intensify the associated mental states, so to strengthen them, and it manifests as bodily enjoyment. And in the case of mental happiness, or in that sense it's known as somanassa, gladness, it has the characteristic of experiencing a desirable object, and its function is to relish in one way or another that certain desirable aspect, and it is manifested as mental enjoyment. And the proximate cause for the arising of this somanassa is tranquility. So what you find with this last point, is a connection, a causal connection between the mental factor of tranquility, or the imperfection of tranquility, and happiness. So when tranquility is there, then usually it leads to the arising of happiness. Now, this happiness as an imperfection of insight has been described in various ways. The Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw of Burma describes it as waves of satisfaction going through the body, or experiencing a pleasant, soothing sensations. One feels very happy. And sometimes certain meditators say they've never in their life felt this happy. And or the same thing goes for gladness. And one foreign meditator once put it in the following words. He said, one feels like being on the top of the world. Now, the Venerable Sayadaw Pandita points out, in connection with happiness, the following aspects, namely that when happiness, the mental state or imperfection of the happiness is there, then a meditator will physically experience either no pains or only very few. And on top of this, frequently when I ask meditators whether their body feels all tensed up or relaxed, the answer to this is clearly relaxed. And then Mary, when the happiness is present, one feels like what? The body feels like what? Oh, good. You mentioned something different during the interview today. What about that massage?
Oh, yeah.
One feels, to quote Mary, one feels like having had a full body massage. So all the stresses and tensions are gone. And one feels like all renewed. And some meditators say the body feels rubber-like. Now, this particular experience of happiness may manifest even further, namely as a sense of bodily as well as mental ease, or as meditators might say, as of the bodily and the mental sense of well-being. And so there are different shades to this experience. Now, sometimes meditators also may say, well, there's a sense of enjoyment there, and that's pleasantness, pleasure, bliss. These would be other ways of putting it. Now, when we experience this happiness as an imperfection of insight, it is definitely much calmer than joy. Now, it's not uncommon to hear meditators say, well, I experience much joy, and then when I keep on, and they say only joy, and then when I keep digging a little bit or fishing, then they say, well, yeah, there's the body is relaxed and there are no major pains there, and a certain sense of ease and well-being is there. And then I ask, well, would you agree to call this happiness? And the person says, yes, why not? Yes, indeed. And so, then what we have is that the meditator is experiencing not just joy, but also happiness, but doesn't, at that point, doesn't know to make the difference or to discern the two from one another. So, what the meditation practice does is it helps a meditator tremendously to gain a much better understanding, not just of bodily formations, but in particular of mental states, mental factors. And so to then clearly recognize, okay, this is joy, so here's joy, there is tranquility, and then over there we have happiness. And these are not necessarily the same. And once one knows this, then in the future it's so much easier. And now, human beings very much go in pursuit of happiness. And various kinds of happiness are around. For an ordinary person, happiness is attained by doing what? Normally in society, how do we get happy? Sense pleasures. Yes, indeed. And so then what do we do with these sense pleasures?
You indulge in them?
Oh, we indulge in them, yes, indeed. And can you give some more practical examples? Food. Yes, food, and then indulging in the pleasures of the eyes, satisfying those, and of the ears. So maybe listening to some music, and or enjoying the chirping of the birds, and or hearing some sweet voice, and so on and so forth. Now, and then included in these expressions, indulgence in the sense pleasures, are very common human activities, such as maybe drinking. So, drinking wine. And society, especially in the wine-producing countries, teaches us that, lunch goes with a glass of wine, and dinner also goes with a glass of wine. And then there are even the specifications for certain kind of fish. You need red wine, and for another type of fish, a white wine, and so on and so forth. And if one doesn't follow these social conventions, one becomes an outcast. And so then, as a person growing into our wonderful society, one then learns, well, drinking wine brings me happiness. So I'm all jolly and cracking jokes all the time, and so this must be the ultimate in terms of happiness. And as we sit together and are enjoying our dinner and drinking wine, well, it's not just one glass of wine, but it's two, and then it's five, and then it's maybe a few more. And so the next morning, one wakes up with a headache. Now, this is one of the consequences, of potential consequences, of indulgence in the sense pleasures. Now, when it comes to the imperfection, or experiencing the imperfection of happiness, is that the same as drinking 5 to 10 glasses of wine and getting merry, or doing what's that? Getting being merry. So, is it the same or not? So, while you're sitting here in meditation and happiness comes up, then you also end up with a headache? Huh? Obviously not. And when it comes to well, we've elucidated one of the disadvantages of indulging in ordinary sense pleasures, like drinking wine, namely the headache as one consequence. And what can you, or when it comes to the happiness as an imperfection of insight, what do you see as its the most dangerous consequence, if at all? Yes, getting attached. There you go. Getting attached, or falling into one of those pitfalls, namely craving, pride and conceit, and the wrong view, and as a result of this, one's practice stagnates or drops off. Now, when it comes to this imperfection of insight, do you need to sit here in the meditation practice with a bottle of wine and a glass in front of you or not? No? Is this necessary? It's not necessary. And so it's a kind of happiness that arrives or that we get to in a different way. So what do we need to do to experience this happiness? Well, just meditate, of course. And what the Buddha tries to bring across is that there are various kinds of happiness around. There is the happiness that arises, as we've discussed, when we indulge in the sense pleasures, and it has its consequences. And the consequences may be dangerous, or, like Sadhu Pandita likes to point out, they can be even fatal. However, there is a different kind of happiness around that comes or that arises out of the meditation practice, and such as the imperfection of happiness, and there is no major danger, or it's not in any great sense dangerous or fatal. And so it is the second type of happiness is not a type of happiness that depends on indulging in sense pleasures, drinking wine or beer, or going to the movies and so on, but rather a type of happiness that arises out of the purity of one's meditation practice, and putting it differently, that arises out of the purity of the mind. And so among the two, namely happiness that we derive from indulging in sense pleasures, and the happiness that arises out of the meditation practice, which one do you prefer? The first or the second? The second. Is there anyone who disagrees with this? So there is a definite positive quality to this happiness as an imperfection of insight. And we can add two other qualities, namely the joy and rapture, and the tranquility, joy and rapture and tranquility. And so these three together make up what is known as Dhamma delight. And this Dhamma delight is said by the Buddha by far to excel the delight of ordinary men and women. And so reaching, as most of you have already, this imperfection of happiness, is this the end of the road? Is this the ultimate? Is this the ultimate form of happiness? It's not, indeed. And the Buddha vouches that there is a happiness available that goes even far beyond this happiness as an imperfection of insight. And that happiness is a non-sensate type of happiness, namely the happiness of Nibbana. So basically, what we need to understand from a meditator's point of view is, as a meditator, we gain access to certain wholesome experiences like happiness, tranquility, joy, and the equanimity, and so on, that are not available to the non-meditator. And when we compare this so-called Kama Sukha, Kama means sense pleasure, Sukha is happiness. So when we compare this Kama Sukha with the Dhamma Sukha, then clearly we can say that the Kama Sukha is much coarser than the Dhamma Sukha, the Dhamma happiness. And so as meditators who've experienced this Dhamma Sukha, we know that it is available, and especially in times of distress or so, we then hit the cushion and we let the mind calm down, and sooner or later some of this happiness and tranquility might arise, and this then will change our outlook on life again. Now, we're already slightly past 8 o'clock. Time goes by much faster than I thought. And so let's end at this point. Of course, you understand that with regard to Sukha, the 3 same dangers are there. And so let me conclude by wishing that may all of you who haven't experienced these imperfections yet, may you experience them soon, within the next few hours, and those who are already tasting some of them, may you continue to experience the remaining, and may all of you then feel greatly encouraged and very enthusiastic about this meditation practice and all its wonderful benefits that it yields, and it may lead you to continue with your meditation practice and lead you to the ultimate goal, namely that non-sensate happiness of Nibbana. And this is it for tonight. Now, any quick comments, questions, clarifying issues? Yes, Vivin.
Are they only imperfections if you experience craving, conceit, or wrong view with them?
Yes, that's right.
So they're not imperfections if you experience them, but just kind of let go? Or...
Yes, indeed. No, that makes the big difference. So tranquility as such is a wholesome mental state, but if it arises in connection with craving, pride and conceit and wrong view, then it turns into an unwholesome product, or it turns into an imperfection. Then, next question. Yes?
The illumination you talked about, is this something that can happen repeatedly? I mean, some people, if it happens, if you have a strong illumination experience, you come to the realization that it may not happen again, but there may be smaller, lesser experiences. I wonder if it's common that this would happen repeatedly.
Oh, your question is good. The illumination experience may happen or seeing, to put it this way, seeing lights in the mind with eyes closed is not uncommon, and it may happen at different points in one's meditation practice. Already, within just a few days into one's meditation retreat, with the development of some amount of concentration, so the mind gets concentrated, and a meditator may see some bright lights, or even some colors. No? And then, let me see. Sometimes the same thing may also happen in the second insight knowledge to some extent, and then sometimes later on in the practice, the mind turns, brightness arises in the mind, and so then it can turn into much clarity. So. Sometimes, at some points, with some experiences, meditators certainly say they see so much light, it's as if being blinded, internally blinded by light. No. So these illumination experiences occur at certain different places in the practice, and so sometimes weaker, sometimes stronger. And maybe to add one more thing, in terms of colors, in Burma the notion is that the stronger one's concentration, or the strength of one's concentration, will determine the color that one sees. And apparently, when strongest concentration is present, then this leads to an experience of white light. And so seeing other colors is said to go along with less concentration, lesser degree of concentration. Then, anything else? Yes? No, John?
When one is sitting, and let's say, for example, one finds the supreme tranquility, I take it the craving would not be wanting to sit there with it, like after the bell rings and extend your sitting, but the craving would come and wanting that every sitting.
It's both, John. It's both. Let's say supreme tranquility has arisen in your practice, and so you disregard all the instructions about being mindful, and you just want to go on sitting longer and longer and longer, and you really want to enjoy it as much as possible. And so that is the one form of craving, and the other one is just like you described. Comes the next sitting, one barely sits down, barely close one's eyes, and then the thought crosses the mind, oh, it would be nice if I could get that supreme tranquility back.
But you did say in your instructions this morning that if you have the energy, and you didn't necessarily say tranquility, to go ahead and extend your sitting, as long as you're comfortable with it. So,
that is
figure out, do I just
John, that's in a different sense. When energy, as in the imperfection of insight, is predominant, then to make good use of that and to sit longer. But the implication was not necessarily to go and indulge in tranquility for longer stretches.
But if you have the energy and the tranquility just happening,
yes,
and so you extend your sitting, not necessarily. See, that's what I'm trying to figure out here. I have the energy, the tranquility is there, and the bell rings, and I say, well, I'm going to sit here because I have the energy.
Good.
And to get up, just because I want to avoid the craving, so I'm trying to figure out how to balance that.
Well, the way to go is, if you've experienced that tranquility already several times, and you're already quite familiar with it, then you could cut things short by simply labeling and observing that tranquility a little bit longer, maybe a few more moments or so, and then simply to ignore the tranquility as an object, and then you bring your attention back to the observation of the rising and falling or some other object, and eventually the tranquility will subside.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
No, but the temptation, of course, is, and this is what I hear from what you said, to sit longer and then experience the state somewhat longer, since it is indeed somewhat unusual, different from previous experiences.
Mm-hmm.
No? Yes, in the back there.
This,
Randy.
back to the illusion experience. Is this a manifestation of impermanence in a universal sense? And the second part is, if you felt emergence, of the soul or impermanence with this light as a manifestation, as kind of emergence of impermanence of that light with your being or presence, how is that experience related to, one, what you discussed, but also it seems like there's a similarity between that and what's described often in the experience of death, where there's a light emergence.
Oh. Well, Randy, there is, or at least there seems to be, a certain similarity between the unfolding of these different insight knowledges and the development of equanimity towards the later parts of one's practice, and the process of dying, where the death or the dying are also said to at first then kind of struggle with the fact of the approaching death and rejecting it and at first not coming to terms with it, but then gradually becoming more accepting of it, and then equanimity is there. And you're saying light experience is there. I've never heard this, but could well be. It would certainly even add then to the similarity between the process of dying and the Vipassana practice.
In Poltergeist, there was a light.
Pardon me?
In Poltergeist, the movie.
Oh, in Poltergeist.
Or maybe the Tibetan Book of the Dead or things like this discuss the soul moving towards the light, crossing.
I really don't know too much or too many details about this. So there could be similarity, but well, the best way for you to find out is meditate some more, and then and then compare your meditation experiences to what you've read in that Tibetan Book of the Dead. No. Okay. If there are no more comments, questions, then let us end our session for tonight.